As soon as I saw episode 2 last week, this set the stage that this was going to be an anime that I was going to be thoroughly excited for every single week. Coming out of episode 3, I feel exactly the same. I absolutely love just how they're introducing more and more comedic and silly aspects to the series, which based on comments that I've had last week, I've seen a lot of people say that it does get more ridiculous as the show goes on, which I'm perfectly fine with, because we do have a serious plot line of why we need to find this treasure, why we need to get the tattoos off the backs of all these convicts. But I like how we're not just focusing on that, and over the past couple of episodes, it's more kind of gravitated towards a more slice of life, kind of just everyday interactions between our two main characters, the comedic factors, but still having that focal point, that objective in the background there. And I really like that, because the overall interaction between two people who come from very different backgrounds, two very different cultures, it's just overall fascinating, and you can tell the author did his research to really sell the Ainu people as something that he didn't just look up in a Wikipedia article and said, yeah, I know how to depict these people. No, you can definitely tell there's been a lot of research to really buy into the fact that this author knows his shit. And I just love the individual interactions. Hell, this episode starts off with one of the funniest moments in the episode, where we just, like, explaining it's gonna sound ridiculously stupid, but seeing it in execution is hilarious. Just the idea of having different foods once again brought up, and then you have miso, which to her looks like poop apparently, and she just keeps bringing that up, and then he's eating it, and just the individual facial reactions, the smugness, the grotesque look, everything about it was absolutely hilarious. And I like how that comment of her saying it looks like poop plays into a factor later on when her grandmother is basically saying, hey, can you marry her? No one else wants to marry her. And she's just trying to say, like, yeah, she just said it looked like poop. I like it. It's funny. It sounds stupid to say, but when you see it in execution, it actually lands as a very funny and just overall good moment. But I like the idea of just the culture that continuously is being introduced since last week's episode, really selling the idea of the food and the people. We get to see her tribe and things like that, because Sugimoto decides to bring a bear back after jumping into a hole where a mother grizzly bear is basically sleeping. And just overall the idea of how they raise the bears for a couple of years, but then ultimately they send them off to their deathbed pretty much. But they do it in a ceremony, which I find incredibly interesting, because, you know, at first you're thinking like, oh man, Sugimoto now has a bear, this is awesome. He now has a pet bear, you know, she has a pet wolf, it seems like. He gets a bear, that's awesome. But of course, he doesn't know the first thing about raising a bear, so it makes sense to give it to her people where they can actually raise it. But it's interesting how the idea that they don't raise their kind of like produce in the same way, you could say. Like, they don't raise animals in the same way that, you know, we do in our day-to-day lives with cattle and things like that. It's very much, sure, we don't try to torture the animals, but we don't really treat them that well in comparison to a lot of other things. And it's interesting how the ceremony for the bear's deathbed is actually this very, like, very religious-like thing, where it's a ceremony, a big ceremony. You're giving them, you know, we're sending them basically to the gods. They get to be in their, like, human form or whatever. Where in our world, we just cattle prod them. We just put a bullet in their head. There's nothing to it. So it's interesting to see the difference in their culture, where it's a very religious and ceremony thing where you send off the bear. It's not really death in their eyes. It's just release. And ultimately, they get to live, and that's how their culture survives. It's very interesting. I like that added addition, because at first you're like, oh, man, the bear's gotta die in 2 years. But then you're like, well, it's really no different from what we do to animals in our own society. But it's actually better, it seems like, for them, because it actually does feel like something that's more than just death for food and a pelt. It actually feels like, to them, that's a release to the spirit world, pretty much. And I really like that added addition. And the comedy was great leading up to that bear, having Sugimoto being like, I'm the Immortal Sugimoto, and he's jumping into that cave because there's no way he can take out these guys. And apparently, they won't attack you if you go inside their den, so he takes that risk. And I love the idea of just the face, there's so many moments that just remind me of JoJo, and I love that because of that just ridiculous and over-the-topness in terms of the facial designs and animation, jumping in there and then coming out afterwards, trying to hide the bear in his coat, and just the overall facial reactions between the two of them, our two leads here, was absolutely adorable. It was hilarious, it was over the top. It was everything I wanted and more. This episode made me laugh quite a bit, which is something that I don't laugh a ton when watching anime, but the way they're directing this series is so spot on, it's impossible not to laugh. And I like it because I'm sure there's going to be some people watching the show who want us to just go right back, take out a convict, get tattoos, and move on to the next, but I really enjoy the idea of focusing more on the cultural side, the comedic side, just the downtime, and just how the characters are interacting with people who are different from themselves, while having that objective in the back burner right now. But obviously, we got introduced to a couple other sides this episode that's going to show us who are going to be some antagonists for our main leads here. And that's overall great. I really like the detail to the series. It really makes it feel like the author knew what he was doing. We can't just sell the I Knew People as just this one-dimensional thing. We actually have to make them feel like who they were. And I really like that. Overall, the detail to the series is spot on. Obviously, if people don't like the comedy, I could easily see this being jarring for them. But for me, I love the comedic moments. I love the silly moments. Just everything about this, when it's serious or silly, I absolutely adore. And I have to say, the CGI bear that we got this week, I found to be much better produced than in episode 1. Yes, it looks very different and off-putting from the character models, but that is the point of the bears for them. But the way they blended it in this episode is much better than how they blended it in episode 1. In episode 1, the bear just didn't mesh well with the backgrounds or anything. It's supposed to look very off-putting from the character models, but the way it blended on the background in episode 1, it wasn't that good. But in episode 3, I found there was a couple of moments where I was like, yeah, that definitely doesn't look that great. But overall, yes, it looks very off-putting from the character models, but it actually flowed well, it looked good. I have no complaints for the bear in this episode. I'm sure everyone's going to say it looks horrible, but for me, I actually really liked how they handled it. I could understand what they were going for in this episode, where in episode 1, after reading about an interview, I was like, yeah, I can see what they were going for, but it just didn't look that well. It didn't mesh well with the background. I thought it did in this episode. I'm sure I'm going to be the odd one out there saying, it looked good, but hey, that's my opinion. But let me know your thoughts. What did you think of this episode? Are you down for the more silly and comedic moments? I know a lot of manga readers have been saying, it seems like apparently they're not nailing that over-the-top facial designs. I saw that last week, but for me, this absolutely is hilarious. I feel like I know what they were going for, but apparently it's even better in the manga, but I'm digging what the anime is doing. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know down in that comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like, and if you're new, also be sure to subscribe. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.